The First Century Diaries by Gene Edwards, The Silas Diary, Chapter 14. Dardanus was ordered out of Pisidia to join a Roman army marching to the border of the Germanic tribes. This left the brothers and sisters with no way to go to and return from morning and evening gatherings. This did not stop the brothers' ingenuity, however. When a meeting ended, all the holy ones departed together, first seeing the sisters safely home, then escorting those who lived the farthest away. Gradually, the group worked its way back toward the center of the city until the remaining few came back to Brother Jupiter's house. The last 2 or 3 brothers who lived nearby then went to their apartments. If this did not work out, the last few men spent the night in Jupiter's living room. I know of no brother or sister who has ever been robbed or hurt in Antioch of Pisidia. Even to this day, it is the holy ones and no others who dare to travel the streets of that town at night. The whole city, of course, was soon speaking of all these odd things. Nor was that the only thing that caught the city's attention. One day several brothers met in the marketplace by accident. They were soon laughing and praising their Lord. Then one began to sing. All joined in, for the Holy Spirit was overflowing in all of them. In a few moments, other believers who heard the singing came running to the square and joined in. The city had never seen such a thing. Singing? For men to smile was rare. That they laughed was unprecedented. That they sang? Unbelievable. There were Greek and Jewish merchants from other towns who were in the square that day. They inquired as to who these people were and why they were so joyful. From this, and from other stories told in the city, people in towns and villages as far as 50 miles away began to hear about Jesus and his smiling followers. In the meantime, Paul had fully recovered, and he began going to the marketplace to look for work. In the beginning, very few asked for his skills. There was, in fact, no way for Paul to earn grain or enough denarii to live on. Every day the wealthy sent some of their skilled slaves to the marketplace with instructions to underbid any free man who had the same skills. The slave always got the work and returned to his master in the evening with either grain or a denarius. As a result, Paul, like any other free man, was almost always underbid. But Paul did begin to find work because of the brothers in the ecclesia. Slaves who came to Jupiter's living room began telling their masters about Paul and how trustworthy and skilled he was. He is an honest man, a good man, highly skilled, who works fast and is good or better than any man with such a skill. To the Romans they added, and he is a citizen of the city of Rome. It was not long before work was coming to Paul from both the marketplace and the villas outside the city. It seemed that certain slaves were pointing out to their masters that there were leather goods needing to be made or repaired, or that a new tent or canopy was sorely needed. Paul even took on an apprentice named Barnabas, and a quick learner Barnabas turned out to be. Before they were beaten and thrown from the city, Antioch of Pisidia had 2 very good workers making and repairing tents, awnings, harnesses, sandals, and other goods of leather, cotton, canvas, and goat hair. Often a brother or sister would come by to talk with the 2 men as they carried on their work. Rarely did Paul or Barnabas find it necessary to draw water for themselves. Someone was always there to bring them something to drink. As darkness came, when merchants and workers folded their shops, there was usually someone ready to help the 2 men roll up their canvas and carry their things back to their room. One day a brother named Timenius sat down in front of Barnabas and asked, "Would you tell me of Stephen's death?" Barnabas readily agreed to tell the story. "Now tell me of your first visit to Antioch of Syria and going to find Paul in Tarsus," the brother said. Again Barnabas complied with the request, not inquiring as to the reason for this strange request. To Barnabas's delight, Timenius then repeated the entire story back to Barnabas. Barnabas in turn corrected any errors in the story. By evening, Timenius could retell the story back to Barnabas word for word. In general, the people living in Antioch of Pisidia, and this is true throughout Galatia, are illiterate, but that does not mean they are ignorant. Timonius was a bridge builder and architect. He could speak for hours on end regarding the details and intricacies of building roads, bridges, and government buildings. He was a living book on this subject. No one knew architecture better. He taught those who worked with him, repeating the knowledge and instruction he had learned as a youth, plus all he had learned over a lifetime. He had a remarkable mind, yet Timonius was a slave. He had never once held a coin of his own in his hand, nor slept in a room with fewer than 10 people in it. A real surprise awaited Barnabas at the end of the next day. Timonius asked permission to repeat the story once more. Barnabas nodded, but he and Paul were startled when Timonius began. He was telling the story not in Greek or Latin, but in his own native dialect, and that with great flourish. The two men laughed, then applauded as they realized what Timonius had done. Though he had spent the day listening to Barnabas tell the stories in Greek, he would now retell these gospel stories to his slave friends who knew only the Phrygian dialect. "I will return next week with my master's permission," he said, "so that you can tell me more of the wonderful news of Jesus." Others came to the marketplace for the same reason. This is the primary means of learning among those who are unschooled. Barnabas was their favorite repeater, for it took a unique person to follow Paul's wording, and repeating what he said was more difficult. But Paul adapted. Sometimes he was very good at turning the mysteries of God into simple stories. We have Barnabas to thank for that, for Paul learned this from Barnabas' example. Sisters also came, bringing a few small millet cakes, then asking questions, telling stories of their people, and learning to sing psalms from the two makers of tents. They too sat and repeated stories back to Barnabas until they could tell them as well or better than he did. I've listened to the holy ones in Pisidia tell me all about that first visit of Paul and Barnabas to their region. I've also heard them tell in painful detail how the two men were beaten and thrown out of the city, for it was a very dramatic experience for them all.